Have you ever read the Chronicles of Narnia books? I watched the films when I was younger, and I recently started reading the books. I bought the box set last summer and picked up the first one and I flew through it. I can't quite remember where I got to. His horse and his boy, the second one perhaps. I found that one a bit hard going, sort of just a horse spending 150 pages just complaining about a boy. But that world is just so magical and has some really helpful pictures for us. I'm just going to read a quote that I think will be helpful as we look at Exodus 19 today. Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Ooh, said Susan, I'd thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe. But he's good. He's the king, I tell you. Well, that is, of course, C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, talking about the character of Aslan, the lion who was the king of that world. Well, I'm James, and today I'm responding to Hemant, Friendly Atheist's latest video, his Everything Wrong with Exodus chapter 19. To get us rolling, we're going to watch his sort of concluding statement and then think a bit about that.
This was yet another unnecessary chapter. It's a bridge to when God gives the commandments, but it was really just Moses getting to the mountain, then telling his buddies, "You stay here." It should have been one sentence long, not a full chapter.
Hemant's overall point about chapter 19 is that it's as unnecessary as chapter 18 was. I'd like to respond to that for two reasons. First of all, the Bible makes the huge claim that God wanted every book and paragraph and sentence and even word that's in the Bible exactly there. And so a Christian interpretation can't just disregard a whole chapter, but rather expect to find that it slots into the big picture of the Bible in some way. That's quite a challenge. It leaves the goal quite open to potentially falling apart. The second reason I'd like to respond to Hemant's argument is that hopefully by doing so, we'll look at some of the other big questions that he raises in his video. We can't look at them all. I'm sure you don't want to watch a 40-minute video from me, but I'd love to cover as much as possible. Hemant is quite right, I think, when he says that this chapter functions as a bit of a prelude, a background to chapter 20, what's coming next. I think it serves to explain a little bit of what's going to come and to help give us a sense of why it's there. And I think there are two key sections, and we'll look at them in turn. The first section is verses 5 through 6, and the second section is verse 9. So starting with verses 5 through 6, God has just explained and reminded Moses of how he chose Israel. He chose to save Israel for himself and to bring them into relationship with him. And he explains now what that's going to look like. And he says, if you obey me and keep my covenant, then out of all of the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So he's saying that Israel won't just be a possession, won't just be something that is his, the universe is his, but that they will be special in some way, and the way they'll be special is not because they're inherently great people, we'll find out later that they're not, but because choosing to live for God in the way that he calls them to makes them special in a particular way, and the way is holiness. And we don't know what that is yet, and we don't get a dictionary definition here, but we certainly get an illustration of it, I think. So where do we get an illustration of this holiness? Well, first we get it from the Lord saying to Moses, you need to consecrate the people. What does that mean? You need to prepare them. I'm going to come, I'm going to meet you, I'm going to meet Israel in a particular way, and you need to be prepared, and that looks like washing their clothes, and as Moses goes on to say, not having sex. Now, the washing of clothes is I suppose relatively obvious in one sense. You know, they've been out in the desert for a long time. It's sort of like if we were to meet the Queen or the President, we'd want to wear a nice clean suit. Now, there obviously weren't dry cleaners back in the day, so the standards of cleanliness are probably relatively different, but also the reverence, the importance is still there, you know, and so they're washing their clothes so that they are as clean as they can be in the context, because it's so important to be clean for God. Now, the meaning of the holiness stuff is behind that. We've not quite got there yet, but we will. So the consecration is in part the cleaning of clothes, but it's also this abstaining from sexual relations, which we see in verse 15. Now, I don't think that Hemant has the right interpretation of how that comes about. I don't think it's Moses saying, right, you're going to be naked because it's laundry day, and you're going to want to have a bit of sex. But rather, it's this sacramental picture of what causes uncleanliness. In Leviticus and in other parts of the Old Testament, we see, because the relationship with God at that time was very symbolically physical, you would do certain things to exemplify, to show your spiritual state, and certain things would cause the uncleanliness or the becoming unclean of that spiritual state. So, for instance, whilst we would say that, say, walking over a grave is probably disrespectful, the Israelites would see that as actually causing them to in some way come into contact with decay, with sin and death. Not in a hygiene way, in a spiritual way. The laws that break down, the natural laws that break down, causing death, have somehow tainted my person. And so if you touched a dead body, you'd have to leave the town for a week or something. And the same sort of thing was true of bodily fluids relating to sexual interaction. And so there's this picture of abstaining from sex because it's about focusing, getting ready, preparing for the visitation of God. As we build our picture of what holiness is, we've got the people's consecration, the cleaning of their clothes, and their abstaining from sex for a time. And what we get in that is this picture of going from being dirty to being clean, being impure to being pure. And what we see in the next stage of that picture, as the Lord visits the mountain, as he descends on Mount Sinai, is that the reason for the people's cleanliness is because of the intense perfection and purity of God. So, he descends on the mountain, he comes down on the mountain, thick cloud, thunder and lightning in the morning. It causes everybody in the camp to tremble, causes the mountain to tremble. There's fire and trumpet sounds. And Hemant says that this is just sort of theatre, it's quite dramatic. But I think the Bible's saying that it's something of the full intensity of a person who created everything and encompasses all perfections. It's the claim of the Bible. If that person exists and he genuinely descended on a mountain to talk to some people, then creation is going to start to sort of break apart in some way. It's just something's going to happen. And I think that's the picture we've got here. The fullness, the perfection of God is breaking into the universe on top of Mount Sinai in this moment. And it shows us a picture of his holiness, because I think the reason the people can't go up the mountain is because it's a danger to them. We get sort of a sense of this if we jump to the next chapter. In verses 18 and 19, God has just delivered the commandments, which we'll look at next time. and they see the thunder and the lightning and the trumpet and the smoke, and they're trembling with fear, and they stay at a distance, and they say to Moses, please, Moses, speak to us, because if God speaks to us, we're going to die. So that sounds like a really strange reaction to God, to say, please don't speak to us, God, because we'll die. But I think the reason for that is because the intensity, the fullness of who he is, as seen on the mountain in part, and as he speaks those words, the intensity of who he is, it is unbearable to humanity. And the question that leads us to ask is, well, why? Well, if God is absolute perfection and we can't endure absolute perfection, then that must be because we're not perfect. We don't meet the standard. So we've got the holiness, the absolute perfection of God breaking into the world at this moment in a way that is lethal, is threatening to humanity. But the other side of the story we have is verse 9. The Lord says to Moses, I'm going to come to you in a dense cloud. I'm going to break into the universe in my intensity so that the people will hear me speaking with you and will always put their trust in you. And then Moses goes and tells Israel what has been said. So God says to Moses, I'm going to come and break into the universe so that when the people hear me talking to you, to Moses, they will trust you as their leader, as the representative, are working between us. And indeed, we just saw that as we go to chapter 20. They ask Moses to be their mediator between God and them. And that's why I think we get this picture of Moses going up and down the mountain over and over and over again, because that's already being lived out even as this story is being told. I think the point is here, we have the breaking in of God's holiness in all of his majesty, his perfection, for the purpose of making really clear to the people of Israel that Moses is their guy to trust, for working out and learning how to be holy, how to live the way that God wants them to live. This is in a microcosmic sense, something of the picture we see in the New Testament. The New Testament claims that God came and dwelled as a man, that he came into human flesh. The perfection and the infinity and the perfection and the majesty and the love and justice of God somehow broke into human history in a person for the purpose of not just showing a people how to live, but living the life they couldn't live, to meet the standards of the promise God had made with Israel, to die for their sins, for their uncleanness, that could only be perfectly cleaned when God went to the cross to die for them. There's a lot more, I think, in this little section. I know I've not answered every question that I could answer here. I'm going to put in the comments a handful of the questions that I pulled out of Hemon's video as I went, that I don't think I've answered yet. If you're interested in me answering any of those, do put something in the comments, or indeed anything else. As I said at the beginning, I don't want to give you overly long videos. I don't think you want to watch those. If you do, tell me, and I'll make bigger, longer videos. But also do feel free to ask me questions in the comments. I'd love to explore these thoughts with you, if that's something you'd like to do. I look forward to looking at Exodus chapter 20 and the 10 Commandments next week.